Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for taking time today to join us for yet another exciting series of crucial conversations. It's really wonderful to see that we have a total of 436 registrations for today. So MIM Crucial Conversations is an initiative to have bold and open conversations and discussions centered around current topics that will bring about greater awareness in Malaysia. Today's topic, the power of generational diversity, building collaborative and inclusive work environments. This program is being organized by the Malaysian Institute of Management and in collaboration with Conrad Adrener Stiftung. I apologize that we started a little late, but we will start with we have a total of 3 panelists today with us, as you can see. And the first topic is going to be on understanding generational characteristics, its impact on workplace dynamics. So without further ado, allow me to introduce the first speaker, Mallory Loon, the co-founder for Work Inspires. Over to you, Mallory.
All right, very good afternoon, everyone. So great to be here. Thank you so much to MIM and the organizing team for inviting me to be here today. So as the organizers pull up my slide, I'd just like to just get a feel of the crowd, right? So I heard there are about 400 over people that registered. So with 400 over people, I wonder how many of you here fall under the Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, or baby boomer categories. So for today's section, there'll be a lot of speakers and of course with key topics to cover how can we bridge the generation gap and how can we work together to cultivate a workplace where there's advancing generations. So for my part, I'm going to cover a little bit about what are these different generations and how can they move forward together. So a bit about myself. I am a 90s baby. So I was born in 90 something lah. Okay, I won't tell you what lah, right? 90 something. I love adventures. So I'm the person that loves, I will not shy away from things like bungee jumping, skydiving. I just came back from Kinabalu like 2 months ago, climbing Mount Kinabalu. All right. And I've been an entrepreneur and specifically a human development for about 10 years. But a bit about me, on the other hand, being a 90s baby, I'm also known as the Kesian generation. What do I mean by Kesian generation, right? So when you look at this slide, okay, I'm very curious to see which one you fall under. Some of you may be under CD player era. Some of you may be MP3 player era, smartphone era, or some of you don't know what eras are all these. You just entered with Spotify, right? So like for me, I'm the 90s baby. So being a 90s baby, I was from the CD player, MP3 player onwards kind of situation, all right? However, when I say I'm the Kesian generation, it is because our time where we learn things like technology, it was in regards to learning how to type, learning how to use Microsoft Word. So we never learned things like Python and coding. But today, being technology is one of the forefronts of organizations, we are expected to lead the future generations or Gen Zs and all that, but we are still learning it. Okay, so it's a bit hard for us. We are also in the generation where things were black and white. I had my phone, initial phone, where it was the Motorola with the antenna with a lot of buttons to press. So it was those are my early days phone. And then I transitioned to semi-touchscreen and touchscreen all within the span of 10 years. And so we had to learn a lot about how do we adjust all these things. We went from sekolah in English to sekolah in Bahasa, schooling in English to Bahasa, to back to English again by the time I sat for my SPM. And then I went to college, everything in English. So it's a time of adaptability and adjustment. But why I was sharing that is that every generation, despite who you are, have gone through your phases of it. Now, how does this impact different generations, right? Because we look at every generation is practically affected based on the industry revolution. So we have IR 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, and 5.0. 1.0 to 2.0 took 120 years, whereas year 2000 to 2002, which is IR 4.0 to 5.0, is only 20 years. So the gap, you might feel like, oh, my gap with my age with my junior is only 4 years, but how come it feels like a different generation altogether? It's because the industrial revolution is shortening and shortening. Things are changing fast. So our livelihood and the way we live, or the way we carry ourselves, or the way we find survivability are also affected. Okay? So I'm going to talk a bit about all the different generations. So in today's workforce, some organizations still have five. Most companies have four generations. Okay. So you have the traditionalists, baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. Now, if you Google generations, you don't need me to tell you, you will find all kinds of years. All right. Some say born 96, some say born 2000, some say born here, some say born there. So I'm going to spare you the pain about the years. I'm going to focus a bit more about their characteristics. And I'm going to start more on baby boomer because the traditionalist is actually very little in the most workforce. Most companies only carry 3% or less today. Okay, so now our baby boomers are people who are basically mid 30s or late 50s. They are known as the builder generation. Why? Because when they started work, it was the IR of automation and in manufacturing. So everything was about building things, right? So you have cars, were one of the key things that were coming out. Computers were one of the key things that were coming out. So a lot of things were building related. And because of that, their working style was this, and a lot of them you notice today in the company, if your company has them, would be those that started from ground up. So they are the loyalists that work for 30 over years in the company, 40 years in the company, first job to last job retirement kind of people. Okay, so they are the building legacies kind. Okay, and now with that, they are also the type that started with radio as one of their initial forms of receiving news, and hence why auditory is one of their main mode of communication. So you realize they like to call you rather than WhatsApp you. So to my Gen Y, Gen Z young people in the crowd, if you realize why my boss suka hati every time like to call me, cannot send me email lah, cannot send me WhatsApp lah, why must call me to ask me one question? Probably because they are used to calling. They rather do calling and face to face rather than sending you a WhatsApp and try to understand what your response is. Okay. So most things of what they like is they need to talk things out. So when they have a conflict, they like to work it out by conversation. They value appreciation and legacy. So they like people who work really hard. They also want to feel appreciated. So say thank you once in a while, be nice. Okay. And they tend to express themselves in a lengthy manner because they are not the era that go through when mommy and daddy says I love you all the time. So expression tends to go a bit long-winded. Okay, so that's a baby boomers for you. Now your Gen X are those usually today would be in mid-management or higher. So they're the early 40s to mid-50s. They are the doer generation. All right. So they are the types because their parents went through hardship. They like to teach them in Chinese. We have this saying, okay, you must take care of your rice bowls. In other words, if you get a job, it's a precious thing. Take care of it the rest of your life. All right. So they're the hardworking generation. Now they were also the start of TVs and PowerPoints and whiteboards or blackboards, that time blackboards. Okay. And so, yes, I know some of you may be thinking, what's this blackboard? I remember telling this Gen Z about blackboard era, and we had chalk that we used to color our shoes. And she was looking at me like, the whiteboards were black? Why? It's so hard to read. And I go, well, they didn't invent marker then? I don't know, but it was chalk. Okay, we wrote with chalks. And she's like, isn't that hazardous for children? And I'm like, yes, that's why they changed the whiteboard. But anyways, so because of that era, things were visual. So being visual means they like to see things nowadays. So when they were having conversation or they receive information, it's preferably through visual effect rather than auditory effect. Okay. Now, because they were the times where things were very competitive, fighting for jobs is getting more and more difficult because there were more and more people in the workforce. They were really fighting about things like problem solving. So they value people. When you work with your Gen X bosses, they value people who are proactive and solve problems because they had to be proactive. They had to solve problems. They had to think on their feet to get to where they are. All right. And they value resilience and challenge proof people. All right. Now, the Gen Ys, it's my era. So we are the mid-20s to late 30s that were hinting my age, okay? All right. So we are called the adapters. Why are we the adapters? Bukan tu adapter plug point tu, okay? But we are the adapters because we go through, like I said, right? Our education system was transitioning. Our technology was transitioning. Everything was transitioning when we were in growing up. So because of that, things like PlayStation, Game Boys, all were coming up, and hence why games were also a popular thing. So you realize the Gen Ys cannot sit still. They like to ask a lot of questions. They like to, their hands must touch something. It's because of the growing up times where we were playing more sports, more games, more video games. Things were kinesthetic, touch-based learning. Okay, and because of that, because of our education system, we like things structured and guidance. So you might realize when your Gen Y started work, they like to ask you, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? How are we going to do this? What's step one? What's step two? It's because our education system has been very structured. Come on, from Form 1 to Form 5, Standard 1 to Standard 5, Standard 6, everything was standardized. So structured and guidance, okay? And because we were also at the point where when we were growing up, our parents like to say things to us like, hey, adult conversation, don't get involved. Parents talking, don't disturb. So we are not allowed to speak a lot. And hence why going to work, you get a huge chunk of Gen Ys that are really silent introverts versus the newer generation who is a bit more vocal. Look at children these days. Okay, have you seen many of these kids who are not afraid to speak? They like to ask you questions. Think about your own children, your niece, your nephew, and you encourage them to speak because you were once the child that were not allowed to speak. So hence why parenting has a lot of effect on generation gap. And we are also the era of modern entrepreneurs, okay? Modern entrepreneurs meaning that we have the Facebook, the Mark Zuckerberg, the people who drop out of school and make things big, Tan Sri, Tony Fernandez, and everything in between. So we all have the aspiration to, oh, I want to change the world. I want to do things big because these were our role models. Now, last but not least, we have the Gen Z, so early 20s and below today. They are known as the brilliance era. I'm not saying they're smarter than everybody, okay? But brilliance because they learn things a lot faster. Why? Because of social media. And hence why they have the shorter attention span. Come on, look at our social media. We had, I don't know whether you know, but I know MySpace and Friendster days lah. Okay, MySpace and Friendster is like take forever to do your own profile because you have to code yourself. MySpace is a slight upgrade. Then we had Facebook era. Okay, now look at Instagram. When Facebook started, it was just likes and thumbs. And then Instagram came about, it was just posting. But now we have Insta Reels and TikTok, where your posting is limited to 60 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 seconds, and 60 seconds. It's shorter and shorter. So our speed of consuming technology, YouTube, is getting faster. So that's why the Gen Zs learn things pretty much very fast. All right. However, they are also born in a modern violence. What do I mean by modern violence era? Where last time we go to playground and play fine. Today we are going through different forms of bullying. No more physical, mental, social media bullying. We are very protective of where our kids go. What are they? Who are they mixing up with? Because we get with dark web and with technology, we get facial recognition. What's that word? Deep face, yeah, deep face, where they copy your face and Photoshop and all those things. So yeah, things like that cause mental depression. And because they're very fast, they're easily bored, and hence why they also change job a lot faster than people. So companies, you notice that hire a lot of Gen Y, Gen Z tends to have a lower retention rate because it's not your fault, it's more of their attention spans are shorter. Okay, and they are the era of social entrepreneurs, which means that people are fighting for goodness in this world, fighting for goodness somewhere. So climate change and all that became a huge thing, and hence why they value companies with high social impact. So really quickly, these are generally the key differences or key things we assume. We assume traditionalists are disheartened and out of touch, right? But the basic thing is because they value differences. We assume baby boomers are cynical and don't like to focus on people's well-being because they have no emotions. But actually, because they are the type that needs to take care of the rice bowl and work hard, that's why they are the way they are. We assume Gen X are very confident they only want to do big things, but because they are the era of starting innovation where colors all came about, so results driven is important. We assume that Gen Ys are entitled, lazy, and want fast success, but but on the other hand, they value technology focus and work-life balance. And Gen Zs, we assume they only care about changing the world and themselves. These are what assumptions are. However, they actually care about themselves because they value well-being. They want to change the world because they are born in the era of digital natives. They can. That's why. All right. So these are just some quickly research for you to have a look. Or where do they see? So you can see the Gen Z generation, especially millennial generation, they tend to prioritize things like value being themselves at work, significant impact of team performance. They value job fulfillment. They value the team care about their well-being. Okay, and they also have things that they see as importance, which is fairly rewarded financially. because these days cost of living is very high for them comparatively. I mean, cost of living has always been high, but these days you all would know recession's a lot higher. Okay, so you can see that they all have different worries and different priorities comparatively to the different generations. So what does this all means, right? So I'm going to touch a bit about Gen Y really quickly. So generally there are 5 types of Gen Y: the authentic people that wants, be themselves; the carefree people that says, you only live once; secluded perfectionists who basically talk about, I need to be the best version of myself; the big dreamers that want to change the world; and the stress drivers who are basically a bit more kiasula, more competitive. And all these are what they said is important for them, regardless. Positive work-life balance, live life on their own terms, learn new skills, willingness to continue invent themselves. So that's why they get bored really quickly. So if you're wondering why they leave, it's probably because of these reasons. Okay? And hence, the Gen Z. So you will know the Gen Z as a generation to talk about things like slay, era, sus means suspicious, by the way, meet and shook, or woke generation, right? So they value different things on the other hand. A bit more personal fulfillment. They value support from the surroundings. They have strong sense of personal expression. In other words, they're not afraid of telling how they feel. And I've seen a lot of Gen Z who go up to their boss and really express what they feel. All right. But they are the generation where everything is about keeping their words, because they grow up with a lot of times where people don't keep their words. Parents will promise things. So they value a lot about keeping your words. You say you want to do this, you better do this. Okay. And they rather stand out than fit in, compared to the Gen Ys who want to fit in because we want a sense of belonging. They want to feel sense of belonging but being themselves. Individualism is a lot more stronger here. So quickly, how does this impact the company? Well, it does impact company engagement and culture, because how you now create a culture. If your company has been around 100 years, 50 years, 70 years, 20 years, you got to change, because every generation that comes in affect how the cultures are, affects the priority. Leadership and team dynamics will be affected, because how you lead the new generation versus the senior generation is completely different. Conflicts and communication style will get different, because Gen Zs and Gen Y would like to approach conflict head on, versus people who like Gen X and baby boomers who prefer to keep conflict to themselves, go home and complain about it, but will not raise it up immediately. Customer outreach and sales are also affected, because your consumers are getting younger and younger. So you will notice marketing trends are getting more and more vibrant. Look at the Barbie launch. Barbie is a Gen Y or older era. The initial Barbie is 1970 something. But look at how they made it so modernized and capture all the audience, because the audience now are a younger crowd. And last but not least, employee branding and recruitment. So in other words, how do you brand your company so that people want to join you, and how do you recruit them as well? Those things are all changing. Last time we had the millennials would like to go to the career fair at places. These days, they rather attend assessment and also dialogue session with the CEOs, CHROs, or alumni. They rather speak to those people rather than what they see advertised, or either pay, or either career fairs. So things are really evolving in terms of how we should carry ourselves as organization. So I'm just going to touch base this, because the rest of the speakers are going to talk more about what can we do as organization. But the 5 key things I recommend to focus on is culture and policy updates. In other words, for example, if let's say certain things that your company has, like let's say gym benefits, okay? But these days we are advocating well-being benefits rather than just gym, because gym is just one form of workout, but many people like to express or take care of their mental well-being through other forms. So instead of focusing on policy like gyms or fitness, you can also open up to other things. So that's culture and policy updates. Okay, I'm going to touch more about the 2 green color in a bit: advancing generation and dialogue. So of course, alignment of all stakeholders. People need to see that the gap actually is beneficial for innovation and drive, rather than a gap that's going to pull us down. Because the gap, though there, has been around for many years. But if we know how to leverage on it, it will drive innovation. All right. And last but not least, facilitated collaboration. Why do I say that? It's because people generally, it's like you're putting a group of people together who are not familiar with one another. We need to facilitate the collaboration, because people do not know how to. A baby boomer going into the workforce never had this many generations when they started work. So they wouldn't know automatically on their own, how do I foster this collaboration with people who complain that, I have personal matters at home. I cannot come to work today because I'm not feeling well mentally. How do I cope with that? They won't know. So we need to also give such education to them. And so to focus on advancing generation, is to identify that each generation got different strengths, acknowledge that, and develop them accordingly. So someone who is even at the last phase of retirement has something to give back to the company if you allow them to do so, which through mentoring and support and consultation. Versus somebody who's coming in has new experiences that a lot of people probably wouldn't know, like ChatGPT and AI. But how do you use those things to the company's benefit and not be lazy? So that's how we focus on advancing them rather than taking it as it is. Okay. And last but not least, dialogue and conversations. At the end of the day, we are all people. Just because I'm a Gen Z born today in KL doesn't mean I'm the same Gen Z born today in Kelantan. All of us got different needs, necessities, and experiences based on where we are and how our upbringing is. So it'd be good to just keep an open mind that we are all the same person anyways. We are all people. We are not the same person. We are all people. And call out unconscious bias. Unconscious bias here talks about if I see someone making unconscious remarks about diversity or about generations, like, yeah, you young people only want to spend money, call it out. Okay? If you see somebody mock and say that, yeah, these old people don't know how to use technology, one forever hindering our growth, call it out. The more people call it out, the more people are aware that it should not be okay to cause bigger gap. It should be something that we work together to bridge the gap. All right. So with that, I'm going to end my session with these three key sentences for you, right? So diversity is about policies. We set policies to create healthy diversity, but equity is about leadership. As leaders, we need to set what is equal and make sure people practice it. And last but not least, inclusivity is a culture. The culture of the organization allow people to feel inclusive. So we need all these three in order to make DI happen. So with that, thank you so much. I'll pass the floor back to, I'll be happy to answer questions later, but I'll pass the floor back to the MC.
Thank you so much, Mallory. Such an informative presentation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before I introduce the second speaker, I'd just like to let you know that we will have Ms. Katina, who's going to take over the second speaker, followed by Ms. Sugunah Verumandy, who will start at 2:50 to 3:10. We will start questions and answers at 3:10 to 4:10 for an hour. So if you have any burning questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will address that at the panel discussion. So without further ado, allow me to introduce Ms. Katina Abdul Latif, Workforce Management Leader, PwC Malaysia. And she will be speaking on a diverse workforce drives innovation and performance. So over to you, Ms. Katina.
Thank you, Stella. Nice sharing, Mallory. Very good afternoon. Assalamualaikum. So as what Stella shared earlier on, that's a topic that I'll be talking about. Just a little bit background myself. I've been with PwC for close to about 18 years. My key portfolio is basically looking into workforce management. And that's where we have an array of different people organization related services like HR outsourcing, HR transformation, social security, and so forth. So topic that we have for today is very interesting. Michael, can you help me to put up the slides? Yeah, so if you just move on to the next one. The next one, please. Yes, so basically this is what I'll be covering. I'll be sharing in terms of what are some of the insights and findings from our latest PwC Global survey on hopes and fears, and talking about what are the different strengths and the different perspectives that each generation brings to the workplace, taking on from what Mallory has shared earlier on, and then some tips and strategies in terms of how to manage the different generation teams that we have in the workplace today. And a little bit sharing in terms of how PwC embraced the DE&I journey, because about 70% of our workforce are made up of Gen Y and Gen Z. Okay, right? So if you move on to the next slide. So when you talk about diversity, right, it's very much a multi-dimensional concept, and age is just only one of the factors. And when you take a look at the age diversity, it can definitely influence how this age diversity can influence on the secondary areas, organization and cultural differences. So, for example, right, we talk about age, right? As people age, they may have different life experiences. They may have different values and perspectives along the different parts of their life stages, right? For example, like what Mallory had shared earlier on, individuals from different generation, different age groups, they would have varying attitudes towards, for instance, technology, attitudes towards in terms of how they care about more of a work-life balance, or even different communication styles, right? So these secondary differences can sometimes lead to certain misunderstanding or challenges in terms of intergeneration interactions. Okay, the second element is that how age can also impact on organization differences, because within the organization, right, when you have the age diversity, this can contribute to a wide range of different knowledge, different skills, different expertise, right? So when you have this multi-generation workforce, it can bring all these unique strengths, like the younger workers, or employees, their proficiency in terms of technology, right? Having that fresh ideas, as well as when you have the older generation, and they have more experience, and I suppose in terms of making decision making, they're more seasoned. So that kind of capabilities, right? So and when you have an organization culture that's more inclusive, that values and harnesses the contribution of all age groups, that's where you get that myriad of increased creativity, innovation, and productivity. And then the third element is that the cultural differences. Okay, so definitely age has an important factor in influencing the cultural differences. Different age groups will be associated with certain specific cultural norms, traditions, and whatnot. Like what Mallory shared earlier on, someone of the same age who's based in who's from Kelantan versus someone in KL, the way they look, the outlook and perspective may differ. The way they interact and collaborate. So this is particularly that you get to see in cross-cultural diverse environments. Okay. So moving on. So Mallory shared that there could be 4 or 5 different generations in the workplace, and I think it's the first time ever in our human history that we have these 5 generations working together in the same place, right? So when you have this coexistence of the 5 generations workplace, it creates that unique phenomena, and with that come along the potential whereby it can bring either both challenges and opportunities, right? Because each of these generation have its own distinctive values, work styles, perspective, and this can lead to different dynamics. Okay. And some of the dynamics would be in terms of you have that like what I mentioned earlier on, diversity in terms of the rich diversity in terms of ideas, different the opportunity in terms of having that generation mentoring, cross generation mentor relationship, which we can initiate so that you can foster that greater mutual understanding and respect, right? And where younger generation can employees can benefit from I suppose the wisdom and experience of the older colleagues, right? While whereas for the older ones, they can get insights into for instance, like newer technologies and trends for the younger colleagues, right? But there's also challenges of, for instance, potential conflicts, right? Because when you have generation differences, could lead to potentially misunderstanding and conflicts if it's not managed properly, right? Different work ethics, you can have like different communication preferences and attitudes towards authority, may create tension if it's not addressed with open dialogue, or with empathy. Okay, and the other one would be the evolving ataupun different work styles itself. Okay, so the main thing here is that it's important to recognize, the unique perspective which each of the generation can bring. So it's about embracing that diversity, promoting that open communication. How do you foster the inclusivity, right? Like what Mallory was saying, diversity is a policy, inclusivity is the leadership, right? No, what was it? Equity is the leadership, and inclusivity is the leadership. Yeah. So moving on, just like to share in terms of some of the insights and findings, which is just fresh out of the oven. And it's quite interesting in the sense that different generation have got different perspectives. In the survey itself, for the 2023 PwC Hopes and Fears survey, the key takeaway from across these five dimensions, one is on in terms of business viability, in terms of employee sentiments, in terms of employers and employers' perspective on the workforce skills, the work environment, as well as climate action, can see there's differing in terms of viewpoints, right? So when it comes to, for instance, like business viability, okay, about 51% of the Malaysian employees believe that the employers will not survive more than a decade of if they were to continue in the current path. What do we mean by that? Current path is in terms of whether their business model or operating model remains the same, right? Because as we know, the scope and the speed of change, Mallory shared earlier on when you have the industrial revolutions and how it's becoming shorter and shorter and become faster and faster, right? So given that scope and the speed of change been experienced everywhere, one thing is very clear: uncertainty and change will always be prevailing, right? And with all this continuous evolution and continuous disruption that's happening out there, changes in terms of consumer preferences, as well as the skill shortages, right? So these are some of the things that warrant businesses, organizations to continuously look at their business plan, look at their operating model, right? And then we take a look at the different generation perspective. We can see that from the survey, over 60% of the Gen Z employees in Malaysia believe that their employers will not survive more than a decade if they continue on the current path, right? So they are more skeptical. But if we were to spin it positively, there's an opportunity for whereby organizations and employers can take advantage of it in terms of how can they bring their people along the transformation journey. Yeah. Moving on. The other perspective from the survey insight is that when we ask them with regards to job satisfaction, so what we can say that the employee sentiment is quite mixed, right? Across because the survey is covering the Asia Pacific as well as global. So across the Asia Pacific region is quite mixed. For Malaysia itself, so we can see here that generally for the younger generation, they are expressing more of the moderate to high satisfaction with the jobs, yeah, which is I think similar to the global average, and which is also consistent with the previous years. But there's if we further slice and dice it over the next 12 months, right? The younger workforce will be wanting to ask for more of a pay rise, asking for more promotion, and changing employer, about close to 30% of them, even though in this current economic uncertainty, right? So some of the reasons given could be in terms of, they want to seek better career opportunities, better compensation, so which indicates that there's a growing confidence and evolving aspirations among the workforce in Malaysia, right? So moving on, the other element is that when we ask about inclusivity and belonging, what we can see here is that only about half of the Malaysian employees feel comfortable being themselves at work, right? This suggests that there's room for employers to, I suppose, enhance their efforts in cultivating a more inclusive workplace, workplace culture that celebrates this diversity and improving that sense of belonging and acceptance among workers, right? And that is important because in creating that work environment, it helps to foster that sense of belonging and helps to in the long term in retaining talent, productivity, and performance. I think it's just everyone's best interest to continuously work towards this inclusivity and belonging. Okay. Next, when we ask them in terms of skills rated area, about half of the Malaysian respondents or employees said that they have a clear sense in terms of how their skills will change in the next 5 years. right? And also more than 50% of them agrees that the employer organization will provide the opportunities to apply the skills that will be most important in their career in the next 5 years, right? And generally, the younger generation are more positive about this in terms, especially in embracing technology, in embracing new processes at the workplace. So moving on, when there's also a section where we ask in terms of what would be the younger generation's perspective when it comes to the work environment, right? So there's a mixed sentiment here. What we found that there's about close to about 45% of the younger generation say that they have more than one jobs, right? And So you can see that 1 to 4 juggle between 2 or more positions, and more of the territories like Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia, they have a higher prevalence in terms of holding these different jobs, right? Whereas when you contrast it with the more mature territories like Japan and mainland China, they predominantly have more of a single jobs, right? So what does it mean, right? And we ask them in terms of when it comes to remote working, generally everyone, most of them are agreeable that hybrid working is here to stay. Okay, so moving on. So when we talk about what would be some of the strategies in managing these multi-generation teams in the workplace, I think it requires some thoughtful and the need to have more of an inclusive approach that takes into account of the different diverse perspectives, the different values and communication styles of each of the different generation. So obviously, some of the strategies will include the need to continuously foster that inclusive culture that focuses on recognizing individual strength. Yeah, despite the fact that we are from different generations. One of the key thing which key takeaway from Mallory's session just now was that avoid making assumption about individuals based on their generation cohort, right? But instead focus on recognizing and leveraging the unique strength, the unique skills and experiences that each and every one of us brings to the table. Secondly, I think it's also important. This is especially so at the workplace and the organization. The setting of that common goals, clarity in terms of the goal and expectations, right? That the goals that is aligned to the organization's mission. So when the entire team is working towards a shared objective, they have a similar, shared the same purpose. It helps to foster that collaboration and minimize that potential conflicts arising from generation differences. The other area which I strongly cultivate and constantly practice this in my workplace, because I would say about 90% of my team members are mostly from the Gen Z and Gen Y cohort, right? Is that encouraging more of knowledge sharing and mentoring. So a lot of the younger generations, right? They always carve for knowledge, new information, new knowledge, right? So that's where we always have this interchange in terms of having this knowledge and capabilities sharing, project experience sharing, yeah, whereby the senior ones, when they bring that extensive industry experience and institutional knowledge, whereas the younger ones, often they have their up-to-date skills and expertise. So we always have this exchange of information. At one time, we were having this knowledge sharing session in terms of how AI could help us in our day-to-day work as consultants, right? And how can we use this leverage on this new technology in the way we deliver our assignments and services to our clients, right? So this is where we got our younger generation to share with us, with the senior ones, right? And then because when we provide that kind of platform, and when these different generations collaborate, it helps to create that environment that encourages this knowledge sharing and continuous learning. So the other aspect is that investing in an appealing EVP. I think that's very key, especially when you have got different cohorts, generation cohorts in the organization, that speaks to the different spectrum of the generations. Yeah? So the EVP has to be dynamic, adaptable. It has to be fit for purpose. it has to be targeted in terms of the different generation or different type of talent that we are trying to attract to come into the organization, right? And it should reflect the overall evolving needs and expectations of the workforce over time. So areas like in terms of competitive compensation benefits, ensuring that compensation packages are competitive and meet the needs of the different generations. We have embarked on things like, for instance, preferential in terms of understanding what are different preferences of the employees when it comes to rewards and compensation packages, right? And understanding what is the perceived value that they put when it comes to looking at the different types of rewards and benefits that are offered by organizations. The other one is obviously the opportunities for growth and development. How can we make use of the company culture to foster that positive and inclusive company culture, and providing that meaningful work. The other big aspect is about the workplace well-being. So these are some of the things that should be incorporated into the EVP, which is basically investing in what will be a compelling and appealing EVP to the different spectrum of generations. And the other strategy is, I think, is about employing this flexible work arrangement to support the diverse needs, recognizing that different generations have got different or varying preferences regarding work arrangements. Some may prefer traditional 9 to 5 office work, some may value remote work or flexible hours. But basically, cultivate that culture of trust whereby you put it back to the employees in terms of arranging the different ways for them to deliver their deliverables, right? Offer that options that accommodate different needs, because I think that at the end of the day, it goes a long way. It can help to improve the overall job satisfaction and productivity. Yeah, it's basically giving the empowerment. Moving on, just to share a little bit, providing insights in terms of PwC practices, PwC's own diversity inclusion journey. As what I shared, about 70% of our people are Gen Y. As of, sorry, I think this one was not updated. Should have given the latest statistic. As of May 2023, in terms of female representation, it's about 60% of the workforce are made up of female. 40% are female partners, and then 20% of our country management team. So when I say country management team, it's basically our senior leadership team, yeah, the C-suite, right? It's made up of 20%. So we always cautious in terms of ensuring that we bring diversity in terms of when we do our hiring, when we do our promotion, and so forth. Okay, moving on. So this some of the practices which the firm has progressively gone through in terms of providing the different flex practices within the firm. So you can see here that when we have three main different categories that flex at work, things like providing that flex time on Fridays every second week of the month, providing a flex space, career break, encouraging our female employees, ex-staff to come back to us as well, after taking career break. There's something which the firm provides. Life at work, so we have a lot of flexible benefits around that. And then also we have benefits that caters for parents at work, like for instance, the flex dad, flex mom, extended paternity and maternity, and so forth. Yeah. The next slide itself, this is just some of the examples which how the firm incorporates more of a diversity kind of activities into our day-to-day business, so that we engage our different generations at the workplace. Community outreach program. This is highly sought after because our people really craft in terms of working with the community, different communities out there, and it goes back to our vision mission of the firm as well, which is basically helped our clients and our wider stakeholders in terms of solving the important problems and building trust in society. And then we leveraging on some of the national initiatives that we within the firm as well. We have our own World Mental Health there, and well-being is a big thing in the firm. Continuously, we have our human capital team continuously reminding people to always recall this, put priority in terms of well-being, right? And it's not just the big blast email, but also consciously reminding the leaders to also set exemplary behaviors in practice, in putting this into practice. Okay. The other one is that in the spirit of valuing this diversity, we have different programs which the firm has incorporated this into our day-to-day business, right? For example, Lunch with a Stranger is basically a platform for people across the different departments to meet and have that conversation to help us break down, I suppose, the work silos, right? Dispel the biasness and stereotypes and promote inclusion. So the other one is that every now and then we have our human library initiative, where we would invite people from external to share their stories, sort of like living books, so that we will have a chance to ask questions, so that we can understand them and address the stereotypes and preconceptions. So over the past, we have invited people who used to be homelessness to share their stories, former drug addictors, alcoholics, bipolar, people with bipolar disabilities, people with rare disorders, or even from the LGBTQ community as well, to share their experiences. Yeah. Um, the other one is, so we have a parents network, right? Resource center to share information and for parents every quarter, so that they can share their own experiences in handling the day-to-day family life support for parents and mothers' rooms and whatnot. Okay, so moving on. The other one is, okay, we also have um, initiative like Appreciation Day, right? So it's not that we don't appreciate our people on daily basis. We do that on daily basis, but this is a dedicated or specific day that was put aside to show our gratitude and recognition to our people for their hard work, for their dedication and contribution to the organization. So um, and we saw that, we get to see that from our global people survey, right? In terms of when we have this kind of appreciation day for the employees, for the workforce organization, it helps to boost up this employee morale, strengthen the people and the management relationship, because it provides opportunities for the leaders, for the managers to connect with the teams on a more personal level, right? Expressing gratitude and acknowledging employees' hard work, and in the long term can help to improve that overall relationship between the employees and the supervisors. So at the end of the day, it also helps to enhance that team spirit. So these are some of the initiatives that we have in the firm. Moving on, at the same time, we also participate in, because one of our vision is basically working with society, contributing to the community, right? And we participate in national level programs such as this, in advancing women in the workforce. It's a 30% club where we identify women who are board ready, and then we pair them with experienced directors based on the criteria such as professional experiences and interests, and then have a structured mentoring sessions along the way over the period of 6 to 9 months, kind of thing, right? Like what I mentioned earlier on, we have a career comeback where we give women who have been out of the professional workforce a chance for them to return to work, so that they can grow both professionally and personally. Yeah. So just moving on, conscious of the time. So not to say that everything has been smooth for the firm itself in the journey of this diversity, equity, and inclusivity. But basically, it's a journey, and it's not a one-time initiative or a box that can be checked off. That's it, right? Rather, it has been an ongoing and I suppose an evolving process that requires that continuous effort and commitment. And we have dedicated team within the firm that drives these different kind of initiatives as part of the employee engagement. Um, because we cannot take for granted, human beings, all of us are different. So there's this complexity when it comes to this human diversity, right? And it's important that this continuously, because we always have new people coming in, and all these programs need to run every now and then, right? And so it's very much continuous effort, and it's a journey, is what I shared earlier on. Moving on, this is just some of the what our other organizations are doing. So you can see here, for instance, we are taking an example for Marsing Group. So you can see the breakdown in terms of their generation, right? So they have moved beyond looking at different stereotyping, and some of the programs that they have is that in terms of making favor more of an outstanding approach. They infuse that in their HR programs, and they place a lot of emphasis in terms of getting feedback through the employee engagement survey. The other one is the general insurance, ASA AFIN, right? Some of the practices they have put in place, like alternative Fridays, in terms of taking time off. Staff are given the option to take 2 Mondays or Fridays off each month. Employees can choose from the staggered working hours. I suppose this is part and parcel of their own understanding in terms of what makes their people tick and what is it that their people want, right? So this is some of the activities and initiatives that some organizations undertaken. Moving on to the next slide. Likewise, we have seen other organizations like Nestle. As Nestle is a multinational and global company, they have initiative like gender pay equality gap, right, which they report on a consistent basis. And because they really believe on the principle of this fair and equal pay practices, um, the different gender, right? Um, the other one is that Maybank, they have embraced this D&I through nurturing of talent through different groups, like empowering youth to supporting retirees. And they have an employee resource group model that helps to drive certain initiatives for the organization. Likewise, CIMB also have this gender pay initiative, so that they bring the gap to be closer, right? And the Maxis, they have youth at Maxis, which is an employee-led community focusing on building a sense of belonging among the young talents. Okay. So that's it in a nutshell. I suppose at the end of the day, it's all about valuing, embracing the different generations, and how do you harness the strengths, the fact that there are different generations in the workplace, and basically what do you call this? Capitalize on it, so that at the end of the day it helps to build that overall creativity, innovation, and be the leading edge in the marketplace out there by leveraging on these different generations in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you,
Back to
Katina. Wonderful insights. Thank you so much for sharing all your best practices. And it's wonderful to see the results that have generated from there. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the final speaker. I am pleased to introduce Ms. Sugunah Verumandy. She's the Country Human Resource Director for Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. With over 30 years of experience, Sugunah has led the industry partnership and Malaysia professional team in Talent Corporation. She has also led several major human resource initiatives for her previous Fortune 500 and leading employers such as Pfizer, Bristol-Myers, Squibb, and Ericsson Telecommunications. Sugunah has led several human resource strategies, and this encompasses elements that drives business needs and supports employees' aspirations. She has extensive experience in business partnering, organizational development, facilitating talent and change management, including leadership, diversity, and inclusion programs. So without further ado, Ms. Sugunah is going to be talking on leadership strategies for managing a multi-generational workforce. Over to you, Sugunah.
Thank you very much, Stella. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for dialing in. I must say that in my course of work, I have this great privilege and opportunity to work across all the generations, and as such, when MIM invited to share some of my observation, I immediately said yes. So thank you, MIM, and thank you, Cass, for having me speaking in this session today. So what I'll be sharing today, I would definitely like to refer the credit to a couple of sources. Number one is through the HSBC staff engagement input from the HSBC Global Graduate Program, where generally these are I must say, the millennials and the Gen Z, and as well as references from materials such as Harvard Business Publishing. And Kartina, just to let you know that I've made a lot of references to the Hopes and Fears Survey, PwC 2023 as well. So
No
credits goes
problem.
to all this. Thank you. All these sources that I'll be referring to. Now, I won't go too much in defining all the different generations as the previous panelists have spoken about it. What I like to do today is share more of some of the practical observations that we have at the workplace. Like I said, that it's really an honor and opportunity for being able to work across all the span of generations, all the five different generations. And as the previous panelists also mentioned, right, some of the organizations have already have not all, some of the organizations may have only certain generations, but some have spans of all the generations as well. So today I'll be sharing a little bit more about what does this mean from a very practical perspective, and I'll be sharing some of the observation that I have in HSBC, as well as a couple of other entities that I connect with on a regular basis. Now, as all the previous panelists spoke about, it's very important that we must know the different, strength of the generation and the contribution that each of the generation make in order to achieve their full potential. They all spoke about this. It's very important for us to understand. Now, let me take a step back to see why it's important. Why are we putting so much of emphasis? Right? So one of the key reasons why there's so much of emphasis in understanding all the different generational attributes is because we must know the practices around what makes it work for each of the generation. These good practices around the employee experiences can actually drive significant impact, whether it's for business, people, or innovation in your organization. And that's why it's very, very important that we understand all the societal changes. As an example, for companies that they know how to leverage the right employee experience strategy based on the generation, it is anticipated that these organizations can have 4.3 times more likely to innovate effectively. And another example, for organizations that understand good practices around employee experiences across the generations, are 5 times more likely to engage and retain their employees, right? So, and there are many more examples. For example, if companies know how to understand the employee experiences across all the generational, it is 2 times or more able to likely make better customer experiences, and 2 times more able to exceed financial targets, right? So all this data shows why organizations need to pay a lot of attention to the societal changes. Now, let me move on further to show a little bit more information. While each organization do their best to understand what are the obvious attributes that exist across all the generations, which the prior panelists, Katrina and Mallory, have shared, right? There are differences in terms of attributes that they observe across this generation. However, it's interesting also to note that there are rigorous studies that have found there are only some slight differences when it comes to job attitudes and values across millennials, Gen Z, and members of those who are with advanced career, right? So there's a lot of studies. Even the Harvard research also says the same, that while we do acknowledge there are differences in societal norms of this generation, but when you really study it, right, in terms of job attitude and values, there are just some slight differences. Now, let me take you through some of some of the obvious differences that we see at workplace. So our earlier panelists have shared many of them. I'll be sharing some additional insights to this that are very, very obvious out of that many differences that we see, right? And I'll try to articulate this based on some of the observations and feedback that I get when I speak to during the staff engagement sessions. Now, one of the difference we see, sorry, I'll just move back the slide. One of the key difference that we see among the slight difference, now I must quote that because the researchers does show there are some very slight differences. So among the slight differences, the key obvious ones are, number one, I think the panelists have also spoke about that. Number one, that the millennials and Gen Zs, they are very competent when it comes to technology, right? They are able to use various collaborative tools and able to access information very, very quickly. And there are certain preferences. Mallory spoke a little bit about it, that the emerging talent, I'm going to use the word emerging talent in a very, very simplified way to describe the millennials and Gen Zs. They prefer the text, very quick speed mode of accessing and communicating their views, as compared to some of the advanced career generations where, a call and a conversation is more preferred, right? So the Gen Z and millennials' competent use of the collaborative tools here means that more organizations are beginning to see and create investments to have tools that suits the need of the Gen Zs and millennials. That's where one of the key impact that we are seeing. Okay. The second one that we are seeing is in terms of speed of information. Now, a lot of the Gen Zs and millennials, as you know, they are hooked on to platforms, various platforms. What it means is that if there's anything happening anywhere across the world, at their fingertips, they get the information. And of course, when they get the information, the expectation is that as organizations, the leadership is quickly responding to the issues, right? Because they get the information very, very quickly. They are very connected, right? So what it means is that it's not just issues of your organization happening in your country. So for example, if it's Malaysia, if you're leading entities in Malaysia, these days the millennials expect you to also know responses for things that's happening outside Malaysia, right? So in other words, leadership must be ready to assess situations that's happening not just within their entity and within the country, but issues globally, not only just assessing, but able to respond to issues very, very quickly because of the speed of information that they get. And therefore, you can see that the speed of response these days in organization is getting faster and faster, right? So this is one of the key observations that we are seeing. Number three is lesser span of attention. I think Mallory has articulated this very, very well. That's one of the key difference that we are seeing. And one of the key reason is because the millennials and Gen Z, they are really exposed to a lot of information. They do have loads of information. And therefore, their attention span, and this is something that in all my staff engagement session, they openly share, right? They'll say, Sugunah, look, we have very, very little span of attention. And they're articulate about it. They say that, look, I have so much of information around me, right? So whatever that we are doing as an organization has to be very concise, clear, where possible. As such, a lot of your learning and learning leads will start telling you, right, these days, all the trainings will be at very small size bites, very short sessions, um, you know, whether it's gamification or with images or, in a very simulation based, they are all in very, very small bits and sizes. As compared to, those days we are happy to sit in a training for about a whole week, there seem to be lesser preference for such learning. So that needs to be customized quite a fair bit in organizations these days. The other critical observation that we have, again, Kartina spoke about it, Mallory spoke about it as well, so I won't dwell about it too much, but very much in terms of an inclusive work environment. You can see that, whether it's the millennials or Gen Z, they do appreciate an open environment where, you can be yourself, you can speak up, you can you like I say, you bring yourself to work, and the views are respected. Okay, so that's the environment that's appreciated by the millennials and Gen Z. So the ones that Katrina shared, for example, having all your D&I works in place, having a platform for people to speak up, engagement activities where all the different generations come together. These are all that matters in organization these days. Last but not least, I definitely like to touch a little bit on the deeper appreciation on impact on social and environment. Now, I must say that actually, in terms of appreciation on social ESG, right? I must say that even the Gen X or even baby boomers, I must say that they are very concerned about the environment. They are, right? However, what we are seeing is that there are more and more passion and enthusiasm on addressing climate change by millennial and Gen Z. So names such as Greta Thunberg, movements such as Fridays for Future, Zero Hour, these are all making an impact. And if you really look behind Zero Hour or Fridays for Future, basically you can see these are the millennials and Gen Z that's driving the movements. And being the activists, very passionate and enthusiastic about climate change. So a lot of organizations today, these are the key themes that in existence. So for example, in HSBC, transition to net zero is one of our key pillar in our business imperative, and the support that we do with our customers in transitioning to net zero is a big one, and our employees are a big part of driving this change as well. So those are some of the obvious differences that we see, but again, I just want to emphasize that the rigorous studies do find that there are slight differences in job attitudes and values when it comes to millennials and the more advanced career workforce. And within that, there are some slight or some key differences that we see that we need to take into consideration in adapting our workplace practices. Okay, so I guess now that I've articulated a little bit about the societal changes, what are some of the key differences that we see? What's important is that I wanted to highlight what are some of the common themes that we see across these different generations. And among them, if I can just highlight a couple few, at the end of the day, when I go and do my staff engagement, when I talk to people, there are some very basic fundamental expectations that all the generations have, regardless what generation they belong to. At the end of the day, they all say we all want to feel that we are valued and we are appreciated at workplace. These are the top two that comes from time to time. And we want to do a job that has meaning for us, right? And these days, post-pandemic, I must say that whatever survey I do, whatever research I undertake, or whatever observation that I see, or even the corridor conversation that I have with employees, among the top two that comes out, even discussing with other HR counterparts in any other organization, the top two often that comes out is number one, that I'm fairly compensated, and number two is well-being, right? I mean, it's not in order compensation is one or well-being is two, but these are among the few. And of course, career growth in organization. These are the top 2 to 3, regardless whichever generation it is, they are talking about it, right? So what I thought was important to emphasize in this conversation today is that at the end of the day, all the generations that we talk about today, we must, from an organization perspective, understand the societal change. We have to understand, because as organization, as we need to evolve, we need to be sustainable in all our work practices. We need to take into consideration all the societal change so that we are able to adapt and make the organization as a great place to work for everyone. However, the danger here is we have to be very, very careful not to label generation, which will then oversimplify the differences between the groups. That is something that we need to watch. Yeah, I'm just emphasizing again, yes, we need to understand societal change, but let's not get into the trap of over labeling or oversimplifying the differences of each of the generation. Now, what is one of the recommendation we have is that as we understand the societal change between these generations, at the end of the day, we still have to look into the best results that comes from each of the individual's unique skills and attribute. That is something that we need to look at, right? And how do we then do this? There are a couple of simple messages that I like to share. Number one, as I mentioned earlier, very critical to avoid generation stereotypes and assumptions overly, number one. And therefore, as leadership, we have the opportunity to foster inclusive company culture by cultivating awareness of our own biasness, acting with authenticity, and accepting accountability for building workplaces where everyone feels valued and safe, whether they are silent generation, Generation X, millennials, Z, baby boomers, each and everyone is feel valued and safe. Number two, recognizing that all employees as individuals have their own unique and valuable skill set. Yeah. And how do we then harness each of this attribute to create that competitive advantage? And scaling that competitive advantage at a higher level, where everyone else across the other team can access that competitive advantage as well. Number three is, sorry, I'm just trying to move the clicker. Number three is creating a plan to promote multi-generational knowledge sharing across teams and workplaces. So the earlier panelists have highlighted this quite a fair bit, so I won't go too much in this. What I like to share is that among all the in all the studies that we do and in all the engagement that we do acknowledge that the advanced career workforce, right? So your silent generation, your baby boomers, they actually have a lot of tacit knowledge. They have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experiences that are very, very powerful if organizations can find way to share that across the other generations as well, whether it's your millennials, your Gen Z. Yeah, it's very, very important. And at the same time, the knowledge that and the expectations that the generation Z and millennial have to find an opportunity to get that message across to the rest in the organization as well, whether it's baby boomers or silent generation or Gen X. So organizations that are able to do this in the best possible ways are definitely going to quantum leap their competitive advantage. So one of the example here given is the reverse mentoring. I think the other panelists spoke a little bit about it as well. So in HSBC, we do have reverse mentoring in place. So as an example, what we have is employee resource groups. We call them ERGs. So each of the ERGs we have got that looks at ethnicity, it looks at gender, it looks at abilities, and it also looks at one of the employee resource group is what we call as generation. It's a very interesting group, I must say. This is all run by the Gen Zs and millennials themselves. They lead the activities, and one of the best activities they definitely have come up with is on the reverse mentoring. So I'm in touch very regularly with them. I learned quite a fair bit, especially on digital advances from them, and their preferences in how they communicate with the rest of the leadership in the bank. I must say that, whatever Mallory and Katrina has shared earlier, that they love to have that conversation with the key stakeholders of the organization. That is very, very true. Absolutely an observation that we see. Sponsorship matters to them. Their views are to be respected. All this are very, very obvious. And those are some of the things that we are learning as part of the reverse mentorship. And then we spoke a little bit about well-being earlier. This is to emphasize that, in HSBC, the employee well-being proposition is slightly different. Our well-being proposition is it has 4 pillars, and the pillars are around financial, psychological and mental, social, and physical, right? So we cover all 4. So financial well-being is one where we have a lot of tools that we share with our colleagues and with their family members. For example, how do you grow your wealth? How do you invest smart? How do you do your savings? So that itself is one well-being pillar. We acknowledge that during pandemic, a lot of family members have their job impacted. Some of them lost their jobs. So we felt that as a financial institute, it is our responsibility to make tools available for our communities, our employees, and their family members as well. So we have now incorporated financial well-being as our critical tool. So of course, if MIM and Kes, you like to do a session on financial tool, we're more than happy to come and share some of our tools to broader community. So that's one, financial well-being. And then of course, in terms of mental and psychological well-being, of course, we have support 24/7 for our employees as well as their family members. access to psychologists, and on top of it, depending whatever support that they need, whether it's their career growth or any other personal situation, they have access to 24/7 support as well. Physical, um, I must say that, post-pandemic, of course, we were able to bring back a lot of physical activity, and our physical activity not just involves, your sports programs or your yoga programs. It's a lot about diets. It's a lot about creating lifestyle changes that's important for your well-being. So this year alone, as said today, we have run more than 28 programs for our employees around physical well-being. And last but not least, as I mentioned, is on the social well-being. Post-pandemic, we realized that there's a lot more impact in terms of social for individuals and family members. So we have also incorporated social well-being as part of our well-being offering in the bank as well. So I was actually very excited when I saw Katrina shared a lot of the programs that other institutions are carrying. I think this is something that all organizations, if they are yet to do it, it's definitely an area that organization need to start focusing in. Now, of course, on top of that, I must say that in HSBC, we have now included all managers need to be trained in areas with regards to well-being. So we have programs for managers they need to go through to be able to have conversation with their team members as well, at least at a very high level in terms of well-being, and where needed they need to make referral for further support, as an example. Yeah, so we're making that shift that in the past this used to be HR's role, but now no, all managers need to know about well-being. Okay, so I've just got a couple more slides just in the interest of time, because I believe what's more exciting is that to have conversation after this. So how do we now then drive all these different initiatives? I think Katrina and Mallory have spoken this in depth. So I'll just pick one or two as an example. I think one key example, there's multiple here that's being shown on the slide. I'll pick maybe the maybe two here. One is the new hiring onboarding. This is a great opportunity when you hire new individuals into your organization. It's important that at that point itself, as organization, you let them know the culture of your entity in terms of encouraging inclusion, regardless what generation it is. That needs to start from the beginning. Okay. And then, of course, the other panelists spoke about this, creating opportunity to encourage collaboration across diverse groups. And there's many ways you can do it, right? Whether it's your small focus group discussion, whether it's through your hangouts or your lepak sessions. I see that Katrina showed some as well, right? So this is where the opportunity to really reduce the knowledge gaps and the understanding gaps that you can have. And your training programs. So whatever training programs there is in your entity, opportunity to include that bits and sizes of what does your culture constitute in terms of understanding the societal changes across the multiple generation. That's some of the tips that I could share as you build on working across the multiple generation. Okay, this is just an example of a framework that I've seen across my research of all the research that I do on working across generational diversity. I thought the Bersin one was quite an interesting one. I'm just sharing as an example. But what's more important now is also to acknowledge that yes, there are some differences of societal norms, but at the end of the day, many researchers have shown that there are some very, very slight difference at the end of the day. Yeah. So with that, I end my sharing, and I'll hand over back to Stella, and I look forward to the panel conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sugunah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is 3:35. We are in just to be mindful of time because we will end the session at 4:10. I will not do any further recap, but really I see a lot of questions that have come through the chat group. Thank you very much for sending in your questions. We're going to go with the very first question, and this comes from Chris Chu. Gen Z ready to challenge, especially authority, but are they good in interpersonal skills and expressive? So, Mallory?
Yeah. Okay. I think I'll start that. Thank you so much, Chris. I
Yes,
see that Chris is the popular one with a lot of questions to ask. Um, I
absolutely.
will I will address this and also maybe the next question on the personality because I think it's pretty similar. I
Thank you.
think first and
Thanks.
yeah, no problem. So first and foremost, we have to identify that skills like interpersonal skills are and personalities varies from individual to individual. So it doesn't really have anything to do with generations, but it's a lot more to do with the person itself, right? I have to say that the Gen Zs on overall market, they are a lot more blunt or direct as the word would use it, as in they're more vocal and direct. And like what Suguna was saying, like they would just tell you straight that this is too much information. Let's just shorten things. They would just say it straight. So to different people listening, it may be blunt on some, it could be direct for some, it could be rude for some. But that's just to them. It's just I'm being honest. So I do. But with that said, like what Suguna and Kartina was mentioning, right? The programs that we develop in the company could help address those. Like, okay, where we understand how to advance different generations, talk about different generations. We also talk about how do you now talk to your boss who is different. How do you talk to your staff who is different? Because not just bosses who are more wiser generation, but also sometimes now we as managers or younger managers have bosses who are or have staff who are of senior generation. That means I'm the manager as a Gen Y or Gen X, but I have a baby boomer staff, that kind of situations as well. So it's not so much of just relying on bosses who are a bit more senior or junior, and that could be addressed through training, development, and conversations as well. So same thing with Kodip's question on generations differ according to personality. Personality is individual. Generations is like what we said. It's just common traits we see molded by the environment, but that doesn't define a person. So I hope that answers both questions really quickly.
Thank you so much, Mallory, for that. We're going to go to a question that came from Ahmad Zaini, and this question is directed to Katina. Can you share some challenges that you face while working with younger generations? How do you approach your communication with them? I think it's such an interesting question here. So over to you, Katina. Katina, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. Yes,
Sorry, I unmuted myself. Thank you for
it's
the
okay.
question. Yeah. So like what the other panelists had shared earlier on, right? Especially with the younger staff, younger generation, right? They tend to have a short attention span, right? Which I totally agree, right? It can be quite a challenge in terms of maintaining the engagement, especially when you have that lengthy discussion and presentation. So I always made a point in terms of like for instance, if I'm having a brainstorming session with them, right? The way we organize the setup is important, where I don't allow people to sit. I would get them to be standing up, and then making sure that our agenda is short and straight to the point, right? And I tend to make use of edit tools like what is it called? Slido, because they like using Slido, they like using Kahoot, right? In terms of providing their feedback or comments, right? But obviously, I would invite them to provide them, get them to share their views or whatnot. But quite a number of them prefer to use, because especially the shy ones, right? And also I noticed that younger individuals, they often prefer informal communication styles, right? Um, So depending on the context, depending on situation, I'll use a mix of different communication mediums in reaching out to my team members, right? And one key thing is that because PwC gives a lot of emphasis on what do you call this, engagement, interaction, and whatnot. I even have my own dedicated team that leads the people champion activities, right? So that and I normally get my younger ones to organize activities where the senior ones, the younger ones, we'll mix around and then we do activities together. So this is part and parcel of, getting their buy-in and getting them to, be open to one and collaborate with different, getting them to work across the different generations within the workplace itself.
Thank you so much, Katina, for that. We've got a follow-up question from there, and the question is, what is the best way to approach calling out unconscious bias with your immediate superior and your boss? We saw that a lot in many of your slides on unconscious bias. Who would like to take this? Valerie? Or Sugunah? Okay, go ahead,
Okay,
Sugunah.
yeah, can. I'll give a shot on this, but of course the other panelists can jump in as well.
Sure.
There's many ways we can call out unconscious bias, especially with your managers, right? I do acknowledge sometimes people are not comfortable raising to their superiors to say, hey, I sense some unconscious bias, yes. So there are many things, many ways we can address that. Number one is a lot of organizations start unconscious bias as a form of training. Many organizations do that. They start that as an awareness session. They start with the leadership, then they go to the middle level managers, and then they go to the rest of the employees as well. So, a lot of organizations do that. I noticed that it starts as a learning, as an awareness, because often what we notice is unconscious bias it's unconscious. It's just not aware, right, that they were having that perception. So it starts with the training. And I've seen that very active with very senior managers where upon the training, they do role play, they do case studies, and that awareness comes directly, whether it's CEOs, senior leadership. Number two, there's a lot of feed forward tool that they do. So, for example, in HSBC, for senior leadership, we have what we call as feed forward or 360-degree, where we can give our feedback if you don't want to, kind of go directly to your senior manager and have that conversation. So those are available tools to help in the unconscious bias. But of course, there are other analogy that we use in HSBC. We call it the positive standby. So positive standby, as in that you may not be the exact subject in this perspective. So, for example, you want to give a feedback to your manager, but then you're not sure how to do it. But people around you, if they observe the same situation, they have an obligation to share that feed forward. And we do have training even for people to do that, right? So sometimes you notice your friend is having a situation, but your friend don't know how to handle it. But then you are all trained to coach your friend, and at the same time you are trained to escalate that matter as well, because we believe in the culture of speak up. So everybody has the right to speak up. You don't have to be the subject, but as long as you are there in that situation, you have a right to speak up on behalf of your friend as well. So those are some of the tools that I could recommend. So those are three or four, but I'm sure there are many other ways as well.
Thank you so much, Sugunah. Katina, you'd like to add something, I see?
Yeah, just to add on what Sugunah shared early on, in PwC, just using my firm's example, right, we have a global inclusion first strategy, right, which is very much centered on action, accountability, and advocacy. So basically, it's demonstrating the commitment towards the diversity, equity, and inclusivity. Some of the things which we have put in place, like for instance, our workplace policies and procedures, right? Which we have evaluated, which are the practices that we can eliminate potential biasness, in some of the practices that HR practices that we have, like for instance, like hiring, when doing hiring, right? How do you anonymize hiring when you go through the processes, especially when you review the resumes and then you conduct the initial interviews, right? So we anonymize the candidate information so that it would help to minimize that, potential unconscious biases during the selection process. That's one example. The other one is that, we always have these diverse interview panels. We include members of different backgrounds, so that we reduce that potential of grouping, right? And it encourages this more of an inclusive assessment of candidates, right? And then we have quite a number of trainings as well, like what Sugunah mentioned, something similar. Like, for example, in the firm, we have this bias reduction training, right? Each and every levels of the employees, they will go through this training, focusing on reducing biases in various aspects of the work. For instance, when you undertake your performance evaluation, performance appraisal, promotions, or even project assignments, right? Rather than giving it to certain particular individuals and giving opportunity, providing opportunities for other people to also participate in the projects itself. So these are some examples that potentially can help to reduce that unconscious biases using the examples which my firm has put into practice.
Thank you. Thanks so much. We're going to take a follow-up question here from Shariza. Just give me a minute. From Shariza. What are ways to close the gap between generations when there are arguments with each and may have their own way of solutions or thinking to avoid further escalation of argument and disrupts the working harmony? I think this is a very interesting question. I see Mallory,
Yeah.
something very close to your heart.
Yes, because we work with a lot of companies on creating cultures, and the number one topic, even though we don't obviously state it, is about all the different generations and thinking styles, right? I think first and foremost, generations and all that aside, we have to admit that everybody, even though we are the same generation, we all have different working style and thinking style. So you and your friends, your colleagues are all the same in that matter. So if we're just looking at the fact that it's a working and thinking differences rather than a generation differences, then it's a lot more easier to solve problems. Because it's very easy to say that, oh, you Gen Ys or you Gen X or you baby boomers, and then use that as an excuse. But if you look at it as just work styles and communication style differences, then you can immediately think of ways to solve it. I think that's the first thing we're going to do, shift the mindset thinking. So now let's talk about building the culture, right? And we like to use this concept called healthy climates. So in other words, generally there's no such thing as a perfect environment, but we can create a healthy environment, meaning that arguments are welcome provided they are valid. Okay, and then we don't take arguments out. So if you talk about the 10 healthy climates, you can Google it more about it, but I'll give you a simple thing. For example, let's say appreciation. How do you practice appreciation then in your culture? So get people to talk about the action steps. And we've recommended this to our clients. We also facilitated it. And we've seen that some of the clients, they even carry it through the meeting. Meaning before we start our panel session today, for example, we are all in a meeting. So let's create a healthy environment where we can agree to disagree. What should we do? So we pick the climate health appreciation. So we say, okay, so I would like to show, how do we show appreciation to one another? By respecting the views of Sugunah and Kartina. That's what I would do. Okay. Number two, we talk about diversity. So we say that, okay, so we want to practice diversity. How should we? By respecting people's opinion may be different from yours, but still valid. So these are points that we actually call out and practice during meetings, discussions, training sessions, town hall sessions, every session. And that sets the base mark like, okay, so in this 1 hour, we are going to practice these three things. In this 1 hour, we're going to practice this 5 things. In this project team, we're going to practice this. And as you make it a habit, people naturally follow through. And we realize that if we start the training session 9 to 5, just pick training as an example. 9 to 5, 9 a.m., we'll do this. And then we say, okay, we carry this through the day, agree, And you realize by 5 p.m., I don't need to remind them. They will automatically say thank you to one another. They will automatically encourage people to speak up their ideas. We don't need to say anything anymore. And that's just a 9 to 5. Okay, imagine if you practice this for a month, okay, for 2 months. It will be a natural habit across. And it's not rocket science to practice because you create it. So I think that's one framework I think is useful and the most useful one I've seen so far.
Thank you. Thanks
So I
so much, Mallory.
just wanted to add to the question. Um, I I really think that debates, deliberation are very important in any organization, because the more debate, deliberation we have, the better the outcome is going to be, right? Because you have considered various perspectives, and that's when innovation happens. So for someone who, who have seen this happening in your organization, if you see that, hey, there's always this argument, there's always this debate, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? And that's what we want, because the danger of not having a deliberation and debate, then you have a group think. um, Sometimes groupthink may not drive innovation, right? So have that context in mind. But to Mallory's point, right, then how do we then bring all the different views into a funnel that at the end of the day it makes an impact and moves the needle for the organization and the community that they serve? Guess that's where at the end of the day you get into the solutioning, right? um, so that's important. And of course, um, when you have a very diverse workforce, it is very expected. And as leaders, we should encourage the debate and deliberation, because you want the best of each individual's view is brought forward. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's just one of the context perspective. Thank you.
And just to add on to
Thank you so
Sugunah's,
much. Go ahead, Katina.
yeah, just the recent PwC's hopes and fears survey, right? There's one component which shows that what's the statistics? Hang on. Only 34% of the Malaysian employees agree that the manager um, often slash usually tolerate small scale failures, you know. So that really shows there's a room for improvement in terms of how employers can encourage what do you call this debate, getting employees to feel safe and we get that necessary enough sufficient support for them to go outside of that status quo, right? So I think there's a room for improvement for employers to encourage new ideas that challenge conventional thinking so that it helps with the reinvention. It helps to bring in new ideas, creativity, right? And when you take a look at the previous statistics that I shared with you, like 51% of the Malaysian employees think that their businesses might not be viable in the next decade or so if nothing's been done to change the business model, operating model. It shows that the younger generation are recognizing this, right? It shows that it's a good starting point for employers to take advantage of this, and then how to bring the people along, in their reinvention or in their transformation journey. And totally agree when Sugunah mentioned that how do you have that continuous dialogue, right? Encouraging that open and but respectful conversations among the different generations, so that you get to because everyone is unique on their own, right? So everyone can bring value to the table, right? In terms of getting them to share the perspective, sharing their experiences and values. As what Mallory shared, that different generation has got its own strength, right? So the main thing is that creating the platforms for the intergeneration discussion on the important issues, which is important. Yeah.
So we have a term, we call that in HSBC, which is unfiltered, passionate debate, UPD. Unfiltered, passionate debate.
Oh, nice.
Suguna, I'm taking away so many abbreviations, and it's amazing to see the many fundamental areas that you've actually focused on. I actually have this question that's coming from Ahmad Zaini, right? Who actually highlighted that he likes the pillars approach by HSBC, and I think this was very much on well-being. So he actually wants you to elaborate more on it. Does it revolve around personal finance management? Is his question to you.
Yes, that's correct, Ahmad Zaini. Thank you for your question. Yes, so among the four pillars, one of it, the financial pillar that you have called out, it's broadly around wealth management, including your personal finance management as well. So we share some tips how you can grow wealth. How do you go about doing that, not just for yourselves, but we do that for children, schools. We have even started a lot of awareness and education on that.
That's very, very good. In fact, it's amazing to see that there's similar choice of words. The use of well-being is used a lot. And we recently had a webinar, which was done about 2 weeks ago, on science of well-being. And it's talking about the four pillars. So I'm not going to dwell too much into it because we'll share that later. But here's another question from Jeffrey Quack. How do generational attitudes towards career progression and professional development differ? And what initiatives can be implemented to support continuous learning for all employees?
Okay, maybe I'll start quickly on this.
Is
Hi,
that
Jeffrey.
okay?
Yeah. So I think for career progression, for the younger generations, what we've noticed is that they need to have career conversations much sooner than later, because like I mentioned, right, it affects their retention rate. So the reason why they're leaving early, most of them cite is because of balance. Of naturally, work-life balance is one, but more often than not is the opportunity, then followed by the pay. So when we they dig more about what exactly the opportunity really means, is that they do not know or see where they are heading in moving forward. And again, back to the point where the younger generations tend to get bored a lot more faster at the role. So allowing them to see the bigger purpose of their roles also serves a very good reason for that. Now, that being said, a lot of the younger generations also don't know what they want. So that's the other spectrum that we've seen. They know they don't like this, but doesn't mean they know exactly what they want. So I think, which ties back a bit to mentoring. Earlier, Sugunah was mentioning about mentoring and reverse mentoring, right? It can run both ways, where even mentorship will be able to, we can help talk to these younger generations to help them identify what are their development needs. Because honestly, when most of us apply for a job, unlike those days when jobs are very clear, these days most people don't read job description, number one. Number two, right, when they join the company, most of the time, for example, HSBC, you never know what exactly are roles available in HSBC until you're in HSBC. You only know on surface what is there in HSBC. But until you're in HSBC, you realize, oh, there's so many divisions. Oh, so many divisions got so many staff. Oh, under so many staff got so many sub staff. And all those they will not know until you're in the company. So when they're in the organization, that's where we talk about reverse mentoring. It's not just about mentoring on their self-growth, but mentoring in terms of understanding, hey, where this is your strength, this is your personality, this is where you can grow. So you can consider this division, this role, which they will probably never heard about it until it happens, right? So I think that's where the changes are nowadays, is because companies are growing, innovating, transitioning. They're no longer just Malaysia focused, they'll focus regionally. So there are many opportunities that they can go if they know it. And with that said as well, we notice the downfall is that these are things people expect to be told to them rather than they finding out. So in talking about continuous learning, it has to be, like this Sukara mentioned about the training hours a lot lesser, because it's right. We also notice that shift where people don't want long hours learning, but they want a lot of practical learning. So in other words, we actually have to give our graduate trainee or management trainee, where we do for clients assignments, where come up with your growth development plan on your own, because if not, they wait for mama and papa in the company to do for them. And then after that, we have to make it an assignment to go, okay, talk to your supervisor about this, then they will do it. After they talk to their supervisor, we have to say, okay, go look for a mentor, then they will do it. So this kind of facilitated continuous learning, it's a nicer way of saying that we have to tell you what to do, but it helps, because I will give the benefit of the doubt, after so many management training programs, they generally just don't know what to do, because it's too soon, too fast. They graduate by before they're 21 years old, some of them. So yeah.
I couldn't agree more with you, Mallory. We, in this space, right, we're finding it really hard to try and really make sure that the facilitation and the takeaways by the millennials and everyone, all the different generations, is taken so that they're able to adopt these programs, right? And you're right, we've had to find many ways to get them to be engaged. After the 2-day program, whether there's gamification, whether there is going to go into the learning management system, or even getting their supervisors involved. So we've tried many of that, and I have to tell you, it's different strokes for different organizations depending on the context of the organization. So we spoke about reverse mentoring, and Sharina has a question here. Can you share more about this reverse mentoring? How does it work? And I think this is really for Sugunah. Do you want to very quickly give
Sure.
some points on this?
Sure, certainly happy to do so. Um, I'll give the most basic one that you can put in place in your organization almost instantly. So, reverse mentoring is a lot about the most simplest one is having it could be a group of people or two different individuals that have different knowledge, um, aspirations, and skills in a subject matter, right? So, for example, um, I may have some knowledge in terms of, say, leadership or growing career in organization based on my experiences. But I may not have knowledge, say, let me pick up an example. I may not have knowledge in Slack, or I may not have knowledge um, on, say, chat gpt, for example, right? Though I do know chat gpt, that's why I'm always very cautious in stereotyping, because some of the other generation, myself, like my friends and I, we are very very comfortable with technology, right? But I may have no knowledge in certain technology, right? And then if you look at Gen Z and millennials, they are very very competent in technology and advances. So what we can do is, as an example, myself and the individual, say, let's call a Friday evening, say, uh, maybe 5 to 6, we are just sitting together and having exchange of conversation and learning from one another, right? So, and what's important in this reverse mentoring is there's no judgmental, right? We both don't have influence on our performance assessment, right? Because then it becomes a much more open sharing and learning. Because if I have a right on, say, that individual's performance assessment, if the person is teaching me and then I'm biased, I can make an impact on the assessment, right? I will get some rating. So we don't want such nuance at all, right? We want a very fair, open conversation where we are able to share our knowledge and experiences without biases, no judgmental, not judgments, and no impact on each other's performance appraisals as well. So these are some of the basic fundamental conditions that we put in place. And then, of course, you can also consider group reverse mentoring. So, for example, in your organization, if you have a few team members that have very good tacit knowledge, maybe in some innovation work, right? And then you want to get that message across to another group of individuals who probably have better knowledge in algorithm, and then you kind of put these two groups together, and then you get them to facilitate the learning and sharing. But certain norms need to be put in place so that it's effective for the sharing and learning. That's just one simple
Well,
example to.
thank you. Thanks so much, Sugunah. There's actually a follow-up question here to you. Top two employee items which you shared just now on valued and appreciated. Is this still true when many organizations target profitability more, thus causing major downsizing, leading to employee cynicism and fear?
Okay, that's a great question actually. So when I refer to value and appreciated, it's about the individual wants to be feel valued and appreciated. Yeah. So that's the ask of the employee. So that's what I meant. And of course, when organizations, if they have constant restructuring or changes, that especially impacts um, the individual's jobs, then the feel of am I being valued, am I being appreciated does kick in. Yeah, so I hope when I presented the context is that the feeling valued and appreciated is about the individual. Yeah.
Thank,
And it
thank you.
does when organization do changes, they certainly need to take into consideration how the changes needs to be communicated, what are some of the key parameters that's very important. If the impact is there on the employee, then how do you do the transition, without impact, um, to the livelihood of the individuals as well. So even that is being cared and valued, right? Because organization these days, I must say, a lot of organizations, you need to continue evolving, adapting to be sustainable. And when you do that, there are various changes that you need to put in place. It could be as simple as a change in title. It could be as simple as that. But people may feel, oh my God, they're changing my title. I don't feel valued, right? So how do you then, as an organization, do the change, but at the same time able to ensure that you're caring and valuing the employee? Because this person could have been, whether it's 2 years or 10 years, they want to be valued. So then how do you think about the change in title? How do you execute in the best way that the individual accepts it needs to be thought through very carefully. So that's one of the contexts I could share.
Great, thank you so much. It's 4:06. I'm just very mindful because we are going to end the call at 4:10. I'm just going to take one last question here, and this comes from Pamela on a lighter note. It's addressing to, this question is going to go to Patina. It's about, please share more details on Flex Dad and Flex Mom. That caught
Okay.
our attention as well.
So these are some of the initiatives as part of the firm's commitment to fostering this inclusive and supportive work environment of employees who are parents, right? Because we recognize that being parents is not that easy, right? The challenges that they face in balancing their day-to-day professional as well as I have juggling their personal responsibilities. So the flexible work practices was not introduced all in one go, so was progressively done over the years, right? The recent one which we have added on, for instance, at FlexDat, right? And this is initiative that is designed to support our male employees at PwC who are fathers, who are first-time fathers or second-time or third-time fathers, right? And they want to be actively involved in their children's life while at the same time maintaining their career growth. So we provide them with 1 month paternity leave. If they are undergoing, if your wives are undergoing, going to have a baby, and then within that 1 month, they can also take it throughout. They can staggeredly take it throughout the 3 months period to basically help them to have more time at home in helping with their spouse. As they go through this maternity stage, right? Or even when their children are sick, right? So they can have this flex that benefit to settle their personal issues and whatnot. So same thing for the flex mom, but this one is more tailored for the female employees who are mothers, right? And we basically provide them that flexible work arrangement. We also provide them with that, the maternity leave of 4 to 5 months, right? The mentoring opportunities and access to resources that sort of like empower these working mothers to succeed in their careers. And we constantly believe that we want to hold on to our female staff because we see that previously when we do a trend analysis, quite a number of them resign and because of their because of the monthly duties. But we have policies in terms of encouraging our female workers to come back, and Flex Mom is one of those initiatives in enabling them to provide them with that flexible work arrangement, right? So it's not just only Flex Dad and Flex Mom. We have other flexible practices in the firm, right? The remote work, job sharing, part-time work, leave policies, career breaks, name it. So it's basically PwC's commitment to flexible practices, and it's about our dedication in creating that inclusive work environment that supports the diverse needs and the priorities of our employees.
Thank you, Katina. So, in closing, because we're 4:10 exactly, I do hope that you have actually taken a huge amount of insights from here. But my main key takeaway from this whole session, I think it's really about taking time to have that conversation with the employees, getting to know them. What are the things that you should avoid doing? Respecting them, having that genuine conversation. Because when you have that genuine conversation, that understanding comes, and that's where you start to build trust. And when you start to build trust, then a lot of other things start to actually come through from this session. So with that, we took away a lot of stuff from Mallory. It's about diversity is policy, equity is leadership, inclusivity is culture. From particularly from Katina, a lot of it was sharing about the different things that PwC has done. I particularly like the part on the mentoring for female to be onboarded as to the board. And more importantly, from Sugunah, I love all the abbreviation that you call out. The reverse mentoring is the first time I'm actually hearing of it. It's something that I think we could definitely adopt. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the closing of Crucial Conversations for today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come into this session. And I also like to say thank you so much to the three panelists who have actually taken time to share all your insightful knowledge and recommendations in building collaborative and inclusive work environments in the organization. So thank you to Conrad Adenauer Stiftung for collaborating with MIM, and to the rest of everyone who is still here. Stay tuned for the next Crucial Conversations. And with that, thank you for staying with us, and we wish you a pleasant rest of the evening. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone. Sugunah, Mallory, and Katila. And all
Pleasure.
those that are also working in the back end to have this session going. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.